why do we want to audit data? Why do we want to make sure that the data is clean? I always kind of fall back on the saying is life is simple, and you only get out what you put into it. So I think of it, putting the PSA twist on it, the OpenAir twist on it, is PSA tools are simple. You only get out what you put into it. So it's really a lot about data maintenance. When people adopt, deploy, roll out PSA solutions, OpenAir solutions, the focus is, how do I quickly access the data? How do I quickly enter the data? How can I make sure I'm capturing the right data in the system? But capturing the data is the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is getting the data back out. And of course, between the first part and the second part, there's the whole what's happening to the data in the middle. And in order to get the data out in a clean manner, you have to make sure the data is kept clean. So data audits are really a way for you to keep on top of the health of the data and behaviors of people, and be able to adapt to what's happening, or retrain people, knowing when there's time for change, time for enhancements, time for streamlining to help people get more out of the tool. So with that, I started looking at different types of audits. And there's really sort of two types of audits in my mind. One is data audits, and one is configuration audits. So I'm going to focus this presentation on data audits, not finding out who flipped what switch. That's a different type of audit. I'm really looking to see, how is the data being put in? Is the data complete? Is the data accurate? Is the data up to date? And then some troubleshooting things around the concept of auditing, the concept of investigation, troubleshooting. So it's really about the data is what I'm looking at. And I thought a great one, as I work with customers, a great one is a series of audits around how complete is the data when it's being entered into the system. Because that's sort of the starting point, right, of everything that's going into the system. So of the things that can be set up in OpenAir, two come to mind for me: projects and people. So project setup for some companies is not a single person job. It's multiple people touching multiple parts of the project. There might be an integration that creates a shell. There might be a project manager responsible for the task. There might be somebody in finance that's responsible for the rules. There might be somebody in resource management responsible for the scheduling. There might be somebody in operations responsible for the baselining and the cost budgeting. There might be just lots of different touch points along the way. So how are we going to make sure that you have a complete project? Because with process comes checklists and challenges, and without making sure that everyone's touched the project at the right time to be able to have a complete project down the assembly line, you may end up missing information that you didn't realize you were missing. So I always recommend to customers to put a project audit report in place. It's really a detail or tabular, depending on what report interface you're using. It's a detailed report about the project, and it has a lot of key fields that help you understand if the project's set up completely or not. And if it's missing something, then you know sort of who to go to based on your business model and your process, right? As with any report in OpenAir, I would recommend that you schedule it to run on a weekly basis, daily, depending on the volume of projects that come in, so that you're getting information about, here's the new projects, here's where they stand as far as setup is concerned. So on this next slide, I have an example of one that I ran very quickly in our production system. And I have key fields on it. There's a couple of key fields I strongly recommend customers consider including. And then, of course, the definition of a complete project, quote unquote, is really up to your business model, right? Do you have 6 or 7 key fields on the project form that must be filled out? Maybe it's geography owned, or business line, or something that is critical to reporting, and that, of course, needs to be make sure it's set up correctly in the system. But this example screenshot here of a report, I've just put some basic fields on here, and the ones that I always recommend are things like, what is the current budget, so that you can make sure that the budget looks like it's clean and the currency is correct if you have multi-currency. Where's the budget of hours? If this field is driving something like % complete rev rec, you'd want to make sure that this is filled in. And then some key values in the system are number of billing rules and number of recognition rules. So this is a nice field to add in because it gives you that, oops, there's no rules on this project, so therefore it can't forecast anything. It can't recognize anything. It can't bill anything. So this is a good field to check and make sure that you've got the project set up fully. And then another one that I suggest to people to consider is something like first time entry. If you put first time entry and project stage on this audit report, what it gives you information about is if people are starting to put time against this, but it's still in a stage that realistically people should not be entering time on, like it's not at risk, it's not live or approved or active or production or whatever. That's a flag that says somebody's working on this early, so maybe they're putting time on the wrong project, or the project itself is not updated to a stage that means it's actually currently under delivery, being delivered as services. So this is probably a simple report that you may already have in your environment. If you don't, I strongly recommend it. The other setup report is users, right? And the user report is a little bit more open for interpretation, but at the end of the day, when you set up users in OpenAir, you want to make sure they have the right data views and the right permission sets, okay? And so it's always good to set sort of a default role and a default filter set that's very, very basic permissions, like timesheets only or view only, and they can only see themselves and no projects, or something that if the person logs in and they're a contractor, they have a very restricted view, and then they can let you know, hey, I can't find the project, and you go and fix them up if you're catching up with the onboarding. The other thing about the user setup is, are they being tagged in ways that they're being pulled into reports correctly? So a very powerful reporting tool in OpenAir now is called Entity Tags, and that gives you the ability to have sort of a date index custom field so that you can have people contribute to utilization reports when they were currently an employee, but if they leave or get hired in the middle of some kind of reporting period, they're not dragging down the average utilization because they're already they're tagged in a way that they're not going to contribute if they're outside of those time frames. And then finally is doing audits to make sure that people are actively using OpenAir and they're using the license that have been given to them. So checking maybe something like nobody's used this person, or this person hasn't used OpenAir in 3 months. Can I free up a license? This is a really important audit when it comes to things like, hey, we're getting close to our user license limit. How can I turn some people off without impacting operations, right? So these three cases are all reasons to, the permission sets, people are accessing the system the way they need to, they're pulling into reports, and then they have licenses that they're supposed to be using. Those all can be reflected in a report called the User Audit Report. Again, this is another detailed tabular user report that I recommend customers have, at least for license management. And it also is something that you could schedule to run daily or weekly. It really is meant to be something that you're looking at to see what's changed on the user. So I would recommend setting this up and looking at what's been updated on this user in the last week or the last day. If you filter on reports by updated date, that also includes create date by default. So updated, if a record is created today, the updated date also gets today. So you'd kind of kill two birds with one stone in making sure people have their user accounts are set up correctly. So on this next slide, I have an example of a report that I use, and the key values that I use are things like, what's their current job code, what's the permission set or the role that I've given them. So for many companies, this is actually a sort of a handshake of if you come in and you're supposed to be a project manager or a tech lead or a project lead, then your role should be project manager, project, whatever project, management role comes with that. If you're a director, you may get a manager role. If you're somebody, business ops, finance, you might get a finance role. So a nice little sandy check there, just apples to apples if you use job code in your environment. And then there's other things like, keeping departments and cost centers in sync. If you use those two values, that may be something that you're controlling through an integration with an HR system for something simple like that. But other things that I recommend is when you're checking to see if someone has used the system in the last 3 months, it's not as simple as checking the last login date. The last login date is a reporting value, but for some customers or for some users, you may actually be proxying in as that person and putting time in. So it might be some kind of vendor or subcontractor relationship where they're not physically touching OpenAir, but somebody else is doing it on their behalf. So I actually, to satisfy that check to make sure the person has not had to use OpenAir, I check last login date, I check last schedule or booking date or assignment date, and last time entry date. So the 3 of those tell me, are they logging in? Are they at somebody that's putting time in the system actively? And am I planning to use the person in any time in the future? That's what the schedule or booking date means. So between those 3, I can make a decision on whether that person should keep the license or not, right? And then other things as far as data views and data access, you may want to include fields like primary filter set, appears in filter set, especially if you're in a situation where you have a very controlled environment and you have to make sure people are aligned to a specific subsidiary or specific company, and the filter set is set up to control that. So we want to do double checks to make sure that that's accurate, along with entity tags. And these are those date index custom field type values that you can set up on users. So those are 2 audit reports that I recommend, very simple detail reports that you can set up and you can customize them with whatever key values that you need for reporting. But now let's think about the other major thing that we do all the time with timesheet audits, and that's timesheet audits, right? And here I look at timesheet audits 2 different ways. Are users compliant with the timesheet policy, and do users do they have their timesheet in? So you're answering really 2 questions. There's a timesheet status report, one of the most popular reports in OpenAir, advanced report. It answers the question of, do you have your timesheet in, right? Or is it submitted, who's holding it up? It answers sort of, where's your timesheet? Where's your timesheet question? But then you can also ask the question of, but are your timesheets on time? Are you compliant? So there's sort of, where are they, and are you compliant questions. And these 2 questions actually are 2 different types of audits, 2 different types of reports in OpenAir. The timesheet status report, those on the phone and listening to this recording probably very familiar with this report. It's an advanced report, very simple to use. But there's another report that I would actually suggest people maybe take a look at every now and then, which would be more of an on-time measure. And this is what you can build yourself using some custom calculations to do audits to see how compliant people are. And this kind of goes back to our compliance webinar we did earlier in the year. So here's an example of the timesheet status report. If you're not familiar with it, it is in the Advanced Reports tab. And what it really gives you is sort of a time period by time period. In this case, we're doing weekly. What is the status of your timesheet? Is it missing with an X, open with an O, approved with an A, and so forth? There's also another way to use this report, the status report operationally, is that this timesheet status itself, you can actually decide to include or exclude statuses. So if you uncheck the approved checkbox, then you essentially get an audit for people who are missing timesheets. They're on the bad list. So you can look at the report in 2 different ways. But the compliance process, this compliance audit is really, you want to check and do audits to make sure you're compliant, but as far as keeping the data clean, this kind of goes to how accurate is your forecasting, how much of the scheduling information is being replaced maybe by timesheets in your plan versus actual. So you're auditing not only compliance, but you're auditing the accuracy of the information that's being, that the project manager is responding to, because information may be missing in the system, right? So from a compliance perspective, you could look at putting a compliance report in place where you take the timesheet end date and the timesheet submit date. These are standard dates in OpenAir. And you create a difference field. And that difference field, if that difference field is greater than whatever your policy is to be compliant, then that means the person's out of compliance. So a great example is what if we had a weekly timesheet, and the week is Saturday to Sunday, or Sunday to Saturday, and timesheets must be submitted in by Monday. So I have a days to submit metric in my system, and I'll run periodic audits for a quarter or a month on the timesheets and understand how many days went by before the timesheet was submitted for that given week. And anything that's greater than 3 means that person was not compliant that week. So it gives me information to sort of respond and see if there's trends or have conversations during performance reviews. Now, the timesheets are one thing, but billing is something else. So when we're looking at doing audits for billing, this is not really an audit, but it is a best practice. I work with a lot of customers, and I will find that they're going into individual projects, and they're running billing rules and running revenue rules project by project by project. And as long as there's an approach that makes sure that you're keeping on top of projects that are coming and going in stages, and you sort of have an approach to making sure that you have a checklist that you've gotten all the projects, you certainly can make sure you can be confident that you're getting everything. But an easier approach is using this report called the Pending Billing Report, which is in the Advanced Reports module. And that Pending Billing Report gives you the ability to add filters and pull only certain projects in, but it also basically gives you the ability to run rules across projects. So it's really a nice way to sort of do that last final check of did I get everything, right, and run the Pending Billing Report. So not so much, it's sort of an audit, but it's more of a sort of a last check audit type thing. But I always look at another type of audit is once I've finished all my billing and all the pending billing looks like it got processed correctly, I still do a time audit report in the system. And what this report does for me is it makes a lot of my work, a lot of our customer projects are T&M. So this time audit report is a quick way for me to go through and find any time that doesn't look like it got billed. And then I have to do my research and understand why was that not billed. So we'll have an example here on the next slide. But there are also those fixed fee projects, and those fixed fee projects may be tied to milestones. They're requiring something to get closed for a fixed fee on % complete, for example. And those are easy to miss from a forecasting perspective, especially if your projections calculation, your charge projections is set up to be like today forward. It doesn't look back, so it doesn't even realize that you never recognized this fixed revenue over here if it's a milestone revenue situation, or you didn't bill it because it's been in the past. It's not part of your forecast anymore. So there's an advanced report called the Fixed Fee Projection Report that sort of does a quick audit to make sure, hey, what's out there from a fixed fee perspective that we didn't bill or recognize, and should we have billed or recognized it, and be able to check and follow up with the PMs. But let's talk about the time audit report first. So this is actually a simple time entry detail or tabular report, and it pulls key information about the task about the time entry. So how many hours did you have? Who did the work? Pulling information about the task, maybe if you do task level time entry. Is the task non-billable, for example? Maybe that's why it didn't get billed. Pretty obvious then. But you actually can pull information about the task, pull the hours, and then add 2 key fields to the report: the amount billed and the invoice number. And these are standard OpenAir reporting values on the time entry report. And what that essentially does for all your T&M projects gives you a very visual, hey, this hour converted into this money, which converted onto this invoice. If the invoice field is blank, that means you didn't invoice it. If the amount billed field is blank, that means you didn't bill it. Okay? And this could be a simple check to say, I just missed all of this time for billing because the project didn't get moved to the right stage. Like we signed the SOW, but the project was sitting out there and pending all this time. We completely missed it for billing and revenue. So this time audit gives me sort of that last sanity check, and the little investigation to say, hey, what happened here? Why didn't I bill these hours? Okay. The key for this to work, though, you have to make sure that you're only running this on projects where there is a time-based billing. Fixed fee doesn't bill time, so it's sort of, when you have those kind of fixed fee projects, all of that's going to come up as not billed time. So that's where you have to have a little bit of information about, don't include projects that are fixed fee only, for example. But to complement the fixed fee side of things, then you can use the fixed fee projections report. And I may jump into the OpenAir system directly and show you this because it's going to be easier than seeing it on the screen here. But the fixed fee projections advanced report, if I go into OpenAir, what this report allows me to have is I can focus on, am I doing a forecast or a projection based on billing or revenue? So I'm going to use billing as my example here. It's got some basic filters, so I'm making sure I'm pulling specific projects and project stages or clients, for example, if you want to look at that. And by default, what it does is it will, any fixed fee rule that has not already run, okay, and so it could be anything in the past, because there's no time period if you notice on here. Any fixed fee rule in the past that's still active that hasn't triggered, it will forecast it in the current period, the current month, and the period actually is down here. So you can say you want monthly, so instead of a date range at the top like normal reports, you define the period and the number of periods you want to see for your sort of fixed fee forecasting, and this only works on fixed fee rules. So what it'll do is it will give you information that anything that has not triggered yet, it will assume that you are just waiting to bill it or recognize it. You can certainly avoid that, but the whole reason I'm suggesting running this report is you want to sort of catch those overlooked fixed fee rules that are now, the dates are in the past. And then what it allows you to do is when you run it, it comes up and it says, oh, here's the project, and here's how much we should have invoiced. And that value that shows up in whatever period, the first period, that would be something that is either in the current period or it's in the past. And those are the ones that you have to go look at to find out, why didn't we bill this? Did we forget to close a milestone? Are we late on delivery? So it gives finance that ability to go back to the project managers and understand what may have been missed. And fixed fee milestones are a little harder then because you're relying a lot on date maintenance and task maintenance, percent complete. So the fixed fee projections is a good, it's actually an operational tool, but it's a good audit to make sure that you've got the fixed fee rules firing when you're expecting them to fire. And of course, I've put a few screenshots in here to sort of, kind of cover the whole topic that we just talked about. But it's easier to see it in the system because it's a longer form, and of course, this is a presentation. Okay. So between those three, essentially, pending billings to make sure you've gotten everything, a time entry audit report to make sure all your T&M projects got billed through, and you didn't miss it because it was in the wrong stage, for example, and the fixed fee projections that'll look at untriggered old fixed fees to see what may have happened so that you can work with the PM to get that updated. All of those are, sort of key to, making sure the billing's clean. Okay. But I'm sure quite often you get the question of, well, what happened? This used to be like this. How, what? I didn't touch it. I didn't make a change. Why did the project name change? When did the project name change? I swear to God, yesterday it said this. And this is where you have to be that data detective. So OpenAir does provide audit trails directly on a majority of the records. Actually, all the records have an audit trail, but you can get them out on reports in OpenAir for things that you would typically do investigation for. So maybe user records, project records, maybe some setup data like who created this expense item that, we didn't have this expense item before, now it's in there, who created it. So the audit trail itself is actually something that gives you lots of information about what's happened with the data. So this is actually a true audit, sort of what's the history of this piece of data. And it's best viewed from detail or tabular reports, and the field is actually called audit trail. Okay. So on this next slide I have an example. So what does the audit trail give us? And then I'll show you the example. The audit trail lets us know who has made a change, what field changed, when did it change, how did it change, including the old and the new value, and what was the method that it was used to update. And I'll explain what that method means. Okay. So on this screenshot, so here's an example of everyone's got like an OA admin user, and here's what's happened to mine over the years. So looking at this audit trail, it's just a blog of updates that the database is stamping what's changed, what's changed, what's changed. But you can see, you can tell by an entry here, updated at March 8th, 2007 by OA admin, so I know the date and the person who did it. Below that I see what was the change. The change of the timesheet approver went from blank to OA admin, or the expense approver went from blank to OA admin. So I know what field was impacted and what field value changed. And then actually at the end of the date user line, there is a method identified. And in this situation here, there's nothing after the word OA admin. That's because blank means somebody made the update directly from OpenAir. They're in the OpenAir system, they updated something on a form or run an action, and that's what made the change happen. If you have built integrations calling the APIs or using Integration Manager, it will actually say using the API or by using the API. So the update on March 8th, 2007 by OA admin by using the API, it will say that so that you'll know that the data was imported by an external source. And actually with the NetSuite integration also says by using the NetSuite integration. That's the standard integration that OpenAir holds a lot of the configuration of to talk to NetSuite itself. So you actually can find out how that data was changed by simply dissecting the audit trail. Okay. I do have to caution you there are a couple of exceptions related to what you can find in the audit trail. Things like a text block, text area like the notes fields or like invoice notes or anything where you have a text area. It'll indicate that there's a change to that, but it will not show you the information that was in that block. It does not capture that in the audit trail. It just says something changed. So if it's a text field, not a text area, but a text field like project name or something, it will show you the different value that was typed in it. So that's a little bit about how you can use the OpenAir reporting really to focus on the auditing, making sure you've got data set up right, making sure that you're following business processes and you're doing a complete month-end close within the tool, and then basically using that audit trail as a way to investigate the I swear it wasn't me type question, and then finding out it really was that person or it was somebody else. Okay.